The unit Health and Safety in IT and Telecoms 3, so the unit code for this one, HDC504, is a mandatory unit. It's part of the Diploma in Digital Applications SCQF Level 6. I'm going to give a bit of a rundown of this unit, a bit of an overview of it, and hopefully this will help when it comes to carrying out your assessments. So to give you a bit of a summary about what this unit's about, it's designed to ensure candidates are aware of and follow the health and safety procedures that are in place within their workplace and applicable to their job role. Candidates will explore the various sources of information on health and safety available to them. This unit is quite a small unit. It's at SEQF level 6, but it's only 1 credit value, so that means it's 10 learning hours to complete this unit, from learning about your procedures, performing them in the workplace, and carrying out the assessments. That's the sort of expected time frame to do that. There's only one learning outcome, which is comply with relevant health and safety procedures. So what is health and safety? When it comes to health and safety in the workplace, there's 3 main objectives. So it's the maintenance and promotion of employees' health and working capacity. So that is keeping people safe at work, keeping people able to work and to produce and to be efficient, without having to worry about any health concerns. It's about the improvement of the working environment and work to become conducive to health and safety, so the environment itself is safe. And it's about the development of work organisations and working cultures in a direction which supports health and safety at work. So that is about taking on board health and safety principles in all aspects of work, of business processes, and of your organisation's culture. There should always be an element of when work is going to be done, when new things are going to be done, will there be an impact on health and safety if we take that action, if we do that, if we implement this new process or this new system. The most common causes of serious injury at work are slips, trips and falls from height. Now if you work in an office environment, wouldn't really expect a lot of working from height, but depending on your organisation, that might be part of your job. The most common slips and trips, that's if something's been left lying on the ground, a bag that's not been tucked away under a desk, a box that's been left sitting and someone's not noticed it and they've fallen over it, and that can potentially cause a serious injury. There are health conditions that can be caused or made worse by work and working environments. To give a few examples of these include cancer, asthma, skin complaints, stress, and musculoskeletal disorders such as back pain. So that would be maybe if you didn't have a proper ergonomic seat, if you're maybe just sitting on a stool all day for 8 hours a day, that's after a period of time going to have an impact on your back and cause people an injury, cause people a lot of pain. The other one as well is stress, that can be quite a serious issue, health issue, and that also a lot of time is something that can be either developed in work or made worse by work. And it's something that should also, because it's not a physical injury, taken very seriously. Now, depending on your organisation and your industry, you might find that you have a health and safety team or a health and safety department. Small organisations won't, and it'll just be the responsibility usually of line managers. But if you do work in a large organisation or you read any health and safety documentation, there's a few acronyms which you might want to be made aware of, and they're all listed on that table there. So sometimes your team that deals with this could be occupational health and safety, it could be your work health and safety, it could be your HSE health, safety, environment. Not to be confused with the Health and Safety Executive, so that's also abbreviated HSE, and that is in the UK, that is the government body which is responsible for investigating, regulating, and ensuring that businesses comply with health and safety legislation. You've got environment, health and safety, safety, health, environment, quality, health, safety, environment, quality, health, safety, environment, quality, again, health, safety, security, environment, quality, health, safety, security, environment, health, safety, security, environment, and quality. So typically if you're working in a industry which is about engineering, manufacturing, you might find that some of those ones further down the list, that those are the ones you're going to see. If it's more of a professional services, office-based environment, the ones further up the top is what you're going to hear. And if you work in a small business, typically it's going to be your line manager's responsibility, or maybe just the directors themselves that would be responsible for coming up with health and safety policies and procedures. Okay, so sources of health and safety information. It's important to be aware, particularly if you're just getting into the workplace, where you can find relevant and useful sources of health and safety information. Now, when you carry out your assessments, it's important to remember that it's not simply a case of looking at what we're discussing here and putting that into your whatever method you're using, say statements. It's important that you really relate what you're writing about to what it was that you'd done in the workplace, what it is that you're taught, how it is if you had an issue or you had some you wanted to look up, find some information about health and safety, how is it that you actually went and found out about it. But I want to outline a number of different areas where you could go and find information on health and safety. And also when you're writing your statements, I'd always recommend having a variety of different sources in there when you're writing about it. So it's not just a case of, to make it sort of stronger evidence, it's not just a case you went on to one source. So the first we're looking at is online. You didn't just go online and look up for health and safety information. You looked at some of the other areas that we're about to discuss. So one of the first areas you could look for health and safety information is online. Now, what sort of information can you find online regarding health and safety? Well, they're going to be health and safety rules or regulations which are created by, not by your organisation, but by external agencies or bodies. Typically it's going to be government, or it's going to be government funded regulatory bodies typically. Could also be professional bodies. So if you work in a certain industry, so say project management, you've got Association for Project Managers that might have certain code of ethics which might include elements of health and safety in it. If you work for an accounts practice, you might look at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland or the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. In their code of conduct, you'll also find there's going to be aspects of health and safety. If you work in legal, you've got the Law Society of Scotland, which also has codes of conduct where you can find health and safety information. So it is possible to find health and safety information online, but isn't part of the government or part of sort of regulatory bodies that are part of government. So we'll go through the different types. First type is regulations. So these are procedures which you must follow, which all organisations must follow. An example of a regulation would be the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences. It's often abbreviated to RIDOR. So that is a regulation that is in the UK. We mentioned already the Health and Safety Executive, so they are a government body which is responsible, like I said, for ensuring organisations, businesses comply with the health and safety legislation. As part of that, if you have and in the regulations it outlines the exact types of incidents, but if you have one of these incidents, there is a certain time frame which you must report it to the Health and Safety Executive. So there's first of all certain documentation that you must follow, there's a certain procedure, so all organisations must have a proper incident reporting procedure where you fill out an incident form if an incident happens, and depending on how serious that incident is, the guidelines are in that regulation, you must inform the health and safety executive. So for example, most serious, if there's a death, it's within a very short time frame. If it's not quite as serious, it requires hospital treatment, there's more time you've got to before you need to report it, but you still have to report it. So that's an example of a regulation. You could also look at the news, and a lot of the time the news is useful for seeing incidents that's happened in different industries, and a lot of the time that can say, oh hang on a minute, have we checked that in our organisation? And it gives you ideas as to what to look out for. It's learning from the mistakes of other organisations. Often there's news articles out there about any health and safety issues that have happened, and that can help inform your organisation to make better procedures, to review the procedures that you have to ensure that specific incident doesn't happen again. You've also got legislation, so these are laws. It's a bit like regulations, but they're created by Parliament. Example of legislation is the Health and Safety at Work Act. So the Health and Safety at Work Act outlines who's responsible for creating health and safety policies, that there should be a responsible person or an appointed person who's responsible for health and safety issues. It should be a health and safety notice board. What sort of information should be in the health and safety notice board? It outlines that it's everyone's responsibility within an organisation to comply with the procedures that your organisation set out, and to use protective equipment where you have to, or where it's outlined that you have to do that. It's not a case of if you see a box lying on the ground someone could trip over, just leaving it, someone else's responsibility. No, it's your responsibility to comply with those procedures and to move that box into a safe place so that someone doesn't cause an injury. Another location where you could find sources of health and safety information would be your company handbook. Now, your company handbook used to be when you started, you'd get like a paper, like a folder or like a paper booklet. It'd have your organisation's policies and procedures in it. Most of the time now, we've found that that's going digital, and so you'd likely find that on your company's intranet, or it could be somewhere like on a Teams folder, on a shared drive, some sort of location on your computer that everyone in your organisation can access. If you're unsure about that, you could ask your mentor, your line manager, where can I find the company handbook or where can I find the policies? It might not necessarily be set up as a company handbook in terms of its structure. It might just be a group of policies and procedures on a folder somewhere. So that's a good source, and the sort of information you can find there is specific to your organisation. Now, a lot of the time, the procedures which are part of your company handbook would be influenced by the regulations or the legislation which you can find online. So, for example, the Health and Safety at Work Act states that there's got to be certain procedures, certain policies in place. Your organisation will take that and they'll write in a policy how they're going to comply with that legislation, and that's where they develop those procedures. But to give you an example of the sort of procedures you'll find in your company handbook, you'd have maybe a sign-in procedure. Now, health and safety, that comes under the safety aspect of it. A lot of people are a bit confused about sign-in procedure, but that's actually about safety, making sure there's no strangers coming in, wandering about the workplace. It's a secure environment. You know who's in the building, so that is important for safety reasons. You've got your clear desk, clear screen policy, internet usage policy. So that's about what you can use your work computer for, what you can't access. Some organisations don't let you use social media. Some organisations do. Sometimes it's an important part of your role. It depends what your role is. If you work in marketing, if you work, if your part of your responsibility is updating the social media accounts or respond to customers on social media, salespeople using LinkedIn, then that actually might be allowed. But it's different for organisation to organisation. It's important that you can look at your organisation's procedures, and that can influence what you're going to be writing about in your statements. Manual handling, the manual handling policy, so that'd be for lifting objects. Personal protective equipment, what they are, when you have to use them, what the risk assessment is, that will vary from industry to industry. So it's not, this is what you're writing about is going to be specific to your industry. So you're going to be writing about what it is. Do you have to wear any personal protective equipment? Do you have to ever wear any gloves or aprons or high-vis jackets, hard hats, safety boots? Some people work in organisations that are based in engineering perhaps, and if they're going into certain, not in the office, but if they're going into certain areas where they have to go and access to complete a task, they'd have to wear the PPE for going there. Risk assessments as well, so you'll find your risk assessments in there. So those are what can go wrong, what health and safety things could go wrong. Your organisation will rate how likely it is to happen, and then they'll put in contingency measures and mitigation issues. So mitigation actions would be what they're going to do to prevent that issue from happening, and contingency is if that happens, what are we going to do if that incident actually occurs. Okay, so another source of information we can find health and safety is from signs. Okay, so that's quite an obvious one, but it's one that when people are writing their statements often forget about. Now, the best place to find signs is going to be in your reception area. But we'll go through a few of them. You'll find these all around, but again, a lot of them will be found in your reception area. So there's signs which are informational, so these are the blue ones. There is warning signs, which is the yellow ones, and there's prohibited signs, which are the red circles with a white background. So information signs tell you information, so it's actually mandatory. What you have to do, so that those signs there are telling you the sort of personal protective equipment which you must wear if you're entering that area. The warning signs typically are found on electrical cupboards, warning you not to go in, not to touch them, to turn off the power before you access them. Prohibited tells you what you're not allowed to do. No smoking, not allowed to use a forklift in that area, not allowed to use phones in the area. So those are an idea of sort of, and what you want to do is you want to have a look around your organisation and write about what signs you have, and you could be talking about how you comply with them. You get fire action signs, so this outlines the fire evacuation procedure. These signs are fairly standardised. Step processes are to raise the alarm, leave the building by the nearest fire exit, report to the fire assembly point, and there's a blank bit so that whoever's put that sign there can write in where the fire assembly point is. Shouldn't return to the building, and don't take any risks or use lifts. That's the other one that's often on these ones. You've got your fire exit signs, so that will point you in the direction to the nearest fire exit. You've got your health and safety notice board. Your health and safety notice board has to contain a few things. Typically, they will contain who the first aiders are. There'll be posters about common risks that might occur in the workplace, warning you against them. So, for example, don't leave things lying about. Might be messages about how health and safety is everyone's responsibility. You also find this poster here. You've probably seen this before. This is the health and safety executive poster. That has to be in near enough all workplaces, unless it's a very, very small workplace, quite rare. Has to be somewhere in all workplaces, and it outlines information about that health and safety at Work Act. So if you look up top right of the screen there, that Health and Safety Work Act we talked about when discussing legislation, you can find that information online, but you can actually also find the same information on that poster, which should be somewhere within your organisation. You also get signs on fire extinguishers and next to fire extinguishers, identifying what type of fire extinguisher it is and what type of fires it can and cannot be used on. Cool. Again, when you're writing your statements, you're going to want to take note of all this that we're talking about to give you ideas and a bit of inspiration, but when you're writing your statements, you're going to want to find out and write about the procedures which you can find about in your workplace and talk about what your actual procedures are for all these things, what signs you have in your reception, what's on your health and safety notice board in your workplace. So another source of information on health and safety is people that you work with. So there's a few different people within an organisation which you can go to ask for information on health and safety. So the first one is your HR, your people team, human resources. A lot of time they'll deal with policies and procedures. It's also first aiders. So the first aiders within your organisation, that's an additional responsibility. If a first aid incident happens, they've been trained in first aid, and they'll therefore know a good bit of information about where the first aid boxes are, what the reporting procedure is, where the reporting files are kept, the forms you need to fill out, and what you do with them once you've completed them, what to do in different types of situations that might occur. You might have, you probably will have a health and safety rep or officer, so these are a person who has been nominated and they're responsible for any health and safety issues, making sure the notice board's up to date, making sure signs are in place, and doing certain checks every so often to make sure that the organisation is complying with health and safety. And you can also find health and safety information from your managers. You could find out from them what the procedures are by just asking them, or you could ask them where you could go find it, usually on your company handbook on the computer, or a paper copy might be in a folder somewhere. Okay. So this unit is all about complying with health and safety procedures. So you're talking about the different sources of health and safety information. You've then got to know what your procedures are within your organisation, and then you've got to demonstrate how you comply with them as part of the assessment for this unit. So we've covered off the first criteria, which is about what health and safety information there is and where you can find it. So we're now going to look at the last two criteria. So for this, you're going to have to explain what your organisation's health and safety procedures are and how you comply with them. So it's not enough to say this is what my health and safety procedure is. You've got to actually be able to demonstrate that you've done that. So you've got to both know what it is, which is sort of knowledge, and you've got to perform it. So you've actually got to do that task in the workplace as well and write about how you've done it. Okay. I'm going to go through a couple of examples, really, of health and safety procedures. Now, a lot of these are quite standardised across organisations, but your organisation will do things slightly differently. So I'm going over this to give you an overview, but what you're writing about, you need to write about what your organisation does. What is your organisation's procedure? You'll keep the forms in different places. It'll be a different type of form. There might be different boxes to fill out. You'll be wanting to write about who's responsible for it, that sort of thing. So you want to make this, when you're writing about your statements, if you're writing personal statements on this, you want to make sure you're relating it to your workplace and not just what we've spoke about here. That's important because it's got to be in the context of your work. It's got to be you performing these tasks in the workplace. But that being said, I'm going to go through a couple of procedures which might help you select, because for this assessment you're going to want to pick a couple of health and safety procedures which you've performed to either write about or to perform in an observation, etc. So the first one is the sign-in procedure. So this is about safety, so you know who's in the organisation. Okay, so it is important. Why is sign-in procedures important? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, to make sure your work environment is secure and you know who's in the building any time for safety reasons. If there's an incident, and it's noticed that maybe something's gone missing, something valuables went missing, and it's not been identified for 2 or 3 days later because no one's had to use that. Let's say it's equipment, no one's had to use that equipment for a couple of days. You can go back and look at the visitors book. You can know who was in the building at that time as a way of identifying, where the equipment went. Who could we ask? Who's there? Who might have actually done it? They've got to be in the building to if it's been stolen, to take it. Also, in the event of a fire, part of the evacuation procedure to make sure everyone's accounted for that's in the building, to make sure there's no one trapped. And the only way to be able to do that is to have a list of who's in the building. That's essentially what the visitors book is. So it's quite important for those reasons. There is certain steps that you'd perform, and typically they are standardised. So first thing you do is you'd welcome the visitor. So if you're on reception, you would welcome the visitor. Or if you are actually, it might not be a real reception, it might be that they're coming to meet you, and you would meet them at the entrance, and you'd maybe get them to perform that. Some organisations don't actually have a receptionist, they don't have a lot of frequent visitors, so it might be that whoever they're going to meet with, whoever they've got an appointment with, would complete this. So you'd want to welcome the visitor. You'd want to ask them to complete the visitor's book. Now the visitor's book could be a paper book, and the table will look, the book will be laid out like that table is there on the slide, but it could also be digital. A lot of time now we're seeing tablets where you have to sign in on, and you take a picture, you put in your name, and so if that was the case, you'd direct them to the visitor's book. Even if it's digital, it's the same thing. You'd go onto that tablet and you'd get them to complete the various steps to input their information. And on either whether it's paper based or whether it's digital, they'd have to enter their name, the company if applicable. So it might be that they're not from a company, it might just be that they're there for an interview, in which case they're not from a company. But if they are, you want to put in their organisation name. Who is they're going to visit? Car registration, if applicable, might be that you're in an office block in a city centre and there's no car park. Might be the person didn't drive there. But if it's applicable, we want the car registration. Time and date of arrival. You then want to issue them with a visitor's pass. I know not all organisations do this, but if your organisation issues them with visitor's passes, then you want to issue the visitor's pass and write the badge number onto the visitor's book. And you'd want to then contact, if you're not the person they're coming to visit, you'd want to contact the person that they're visiting so that they can be escorted. You would not let them wander about. Typically, I mean, your organisation might be a bit lax, but most organisations you would not have people. You wouldn't say, oh, it's a second right and then a left to get to their office. You would either have them waiting in reception until the person came to escort them if they're going through the building. A lot of time though, visitors don't actually get into your main office, but your offices. A lot of time it's like visitors' rooms or meeting rooms that's at reception, and the person who they're meeting would come in and meet them in that room. When the person leaves, you'd want them to sign out, so basically just put in the time out and make sure that they return the visitor's pass. Right, clear desk, clear screen. So a lot of organisations will have this, and it's about information security. Okay, clear desk, clear screen. So this means that you lock your screen each time you leave your desk. Okay, it's about getting into that good habit of locking your screen. Okay, that's because anyone could be walking past. You could have a visitor walking past. You could be having some confidential information on your screen. You could be having financial information. You could be having invoices. You could be having information about a project that you're working on, someone's application that they've put in with their personal details on there. So it's very important that the screen's locked, because then the people can't see it first of all, and also they can't access it. So if anyone's wanting to do anything malicious to go onto your computer, then they could do it if it's unlocked. Whereas if you lock your screen, they can't read the password, and it's best practice to do that every time you leave your desk. Now I know a lot of organisations take this very seriously, and a lot of organisations don't take it seriously, but it is very good practice to do that. It's a bit of an example. I know that an organisation that I've worked with, as a way of enforcing this, what they do is they would write a joke email to everyone in the office if your computer's unlocked. So if you go away to the toilet, or you go away to go and print something and you leave your computer unlocked, usually the nearest person would open up your emails, do an office all, and send a little joke email to everyone, as a bit of a fun way of enforcing that rule. But it is important that you're following that for security reasons. But just on passwords, so passwords should be regularly changed. Your organisation will have a policy that passwords have to be a certain length. They might have to say on a certain number of special characters or numbers, and they also might have to change on a regular basis. So you'd want to be writing, when you're talking about this, you'd probably want to be explaining what your organisation procedure is around this and how you would comply with it. You also would keep your password secure. It wouldn't be something that's obvious. You wouldn't be writing it under your stapler or whatever else in obvious places. In fact, you wouldn't be writing it down at all, you'd just be remembering it. The cleared desk means that you keep your desk clear at the end of the day. Now, it's impractical to do that every time you leave your desk, but at the end of the day, you'd want to lock away all your paperwork. And that's because there's a lot of people that come into the office after you leave. There's cleaners, there could be contractors, people doing building works. You might not be there the next day. You might be going doing a visit somewhere else. You might be off, and you can't have this paperwork on your desk that might have addresses, personal information, financial information that anyone could just pick up and take. It might even be the case that it just gets lost. It gets blown off your desk. Someone thinks it's rubbish and they throw it in the bin, and you've lost an important bit of information. So it's important at the end of the day to put all the paperwork in a drawer somewhere else and lock it, make sure it's locked and secure, whether that's a drawer under your desk or a filing cabinet or something else. Now again, this does vary from organisation to organisation. Some organisations I know have stuff pinned up against various walls and boards and things like that. You have little in trays. A lot of businesses don't have them anymore because it encourages people to leave paper out overnight. If that's the case and that's the procedure, you need to use those things because that's what your procedures are, then that's what it is. But I know that a lot of organisations now, for information security, will require all paperwork to be locked away at the end of the day, or if you're away from your desk for a long period of time. You should avoid having liquids on your desk, and if you do, it should be in a safe container, so if you spill it, it doesn't ruin paperwork or computer equipment. And it ensures that visitors to the office can't read the confidential information which may be on paperwork left at your desk. There are many visitors which may be around the office through the day, including clients, contractors, repair people or cleaners. I mentioned that. Right, your fire evacuation procedure. So this will vary from organisation to organisation. Again, we want to know about your procedure and what you've done to comply with this. So if you discover a fire, a certain process you need to follow. First of all, you'd shout fire, press the nearest fire alarm button. The fire's small, and this is always probably going to be hypothetical in most situations. Very rare that someone's actually going to have to do this. So you're writing about this, it's fine to say that you know about it and this is what you would do for your fire evacuation. The fire's small, and that usually would be a waste paper bucket size, and you feel it's safe enough, you can use fire suppression equipment. So that would be a fire blanket or a fire extinguisher. You always have to make sure that is the correct type of fire extinguisher. Now that being said, it's important to remember that this is sort of generic stuff. This is what's on the typical fire action signs that's been put out. Your organisation might have a different procedure, in which case you obviously have to follow that procedure. It might also be the case that you want to be trained on the use of this equipment before you can use it safely as well. So again, this is just a generic, what most organisations do, but you've got to tailor this when you're writing about it to what your organisation is. You'd want to call the fire brigade and leave by the nearest fire exit. You'd want to report to the fire assembly point, and you'd want to explain where your fire assembly point is. If you hear a fire alarm though, so you haven't discovered it, if you hear it, you would leave your nearest fire exit and report to the fire assembly point, again mention where that is. You'll also find as part of the fire evacuation procedure that you'll have regular alarm tests. So it might be like on a Thursday at 2 o'clock, the alarms in the building are tested for 30 seconds. So you know if the alarm goes off that time, it's just a test. You could write, if you're talking about your fire evacuation procedure, that's something else you can talk about, that you know that happens, and it's not a real fire alarm. It's a lot of time an email goes out just to confirm to everyone that it's not a real fire alarm. You'd also have, from time to time, fire drills, which is where you're unaware it's going to happen, the fire alarm goes off, and it's a test to see everyone's response and to see how quickly people leave the building and they do it in a safe way. And they know where the fire assembly point is. So you can also look at talking about what your fire evacuation procedure is in a time where you've been involved in a fire evacuation drill. Incident reporting and accident reporting. So if an incident happens at the workplace, so what does that mean? That could be a near miss. It could be something that's to do with a medical issue. Someone's been injured. Someone's had a fit or a seizure, or it could be anything that's went wrong. So it could be maybe some shelving's fallen off, or something's been left in the wrong place and someone's tripped on it. It can be a wide variety of incidents or accidents, whether it's actually happened or not. It could be near misses. They can also be recorded. So what would you do? Now again, it's going to be different from organisation to organisation, but here's a general idea of what might happen, and you want to find out what you do in your organisation and write about that. But first of all, you'd get the incident reporting form. You would put in details of the incident, including its date, the time and location of the incident. You'd also include a description of the incident, details of the machinery involved, and you'd document if first aid had been administered. You'd also record if emergency services had been contacted and what actions had been taken. So did the person go to hospital? Did first aid was first aid performed, or was no action necessary? So that's the sort of information you'd put on there. You'd also record details of the people involved, and that would include details of the person who's been injured, details of any witnesses, and also the details of the person reporting. So that's the person filling out the form. And those details would include their name, phone number, email address, and any other additional information that might be required on the form, depending on your procedure. Okay. Once that's done, the form is then filed, and it's filed in one of two ways. It's either filed in a folder, which is reviewed by your health and safety rep on a regular basis. So it's a paper form and it's put into a folder. A lot of time we're finding that it's digital, and so it would be a digital form, a Word document maybe, and it would be emailed to an incident form mailbox, so it can be monitored on a company-wide regular basis. So that would be that you'd have an email address, for example, incident reporting at yourcompanyname.com, and any health and safety incident would have to be recorded, and it'd have to be emailed into that mailbox, and that would allow your organisation to monitor health and safety incidents on a company basis, so rather than being individual folders. So it depends on your organisation size. Sometimes you might actually have it's on the HR system that you record these incidents. The reason for completing these forms is so that on a regular basis they are reviewed, and if it turns out that certain incidents happening quite frequently, it means that a risk assessment can be carried out, so someone will look at that, what's happening, find out if something can be done to prevent it from happening, and it could be about maybe changing the layout of the office, changing the layout of the furniture, putting in a handrail, putting up a sign. There's various things that can be done to help prevent these incidents from happening, and that's the purpose of recording even near misses. It also ties into that RIDOR that we mentioned earlier, that reporting of dangerous occurrences in the workplace regulation, that for certain instances it must be, it's a legal requirement to complete those. Manual handling, so this is another health and safety procedure which you might have to perform in the workplace quite commonly. It's quite simple, really, and because of that, a lot of people can maybe struggle to write enough detail on it. So we'll outline the general sort of principles of manual handling. So the first thing you do if you're going to lift something is think about what it is that you're handling or you're lifting. You would keep the load close to your waist. The further out from the waist, the more strain on your body that gives. So you want to keep it as close to your waist as possible. You'd want to adopt a stable position. We want to be bent over. You don't want to flex your back any further while lifting. Your back is a very fragile part of your body, and you don't want the weight being on your back, because otherwise those discs that's in your spine, they can slip and cause you a serious injury, very painful. Yep, that's the same one. You want to have a slight bending of your back, hips, and knee. You want to avoid twisting your back or leaning sideways, and you want to keep your head up when handling and move slowly. When you go to pick up the box, you'd make sure that you have a look around to make sure there's no obstacles in your way, both around the item you're lifting and on the path. So you look at the path you're going to take and where you're going to put it down. Make sure the area you're going to put this object down is tidy and there's nothing in the way you could trip on. And then you bend with your knees, keeping the back straight. Maybe a slight bend, but not a massive bend for your balance. You'd pick the box up. You'd maybe give it a little tug or a little knock just to see how heavy it is, just to make sure it's not heavier than you're expecting. And then you'd lift it up using the same procedure but in reverse and putting it down. It's the same thing. Bend with your knees, keeping your back as straight as possible, only bending for balance slightly. Putting the box down. Don't lift or handle any more than you can easily manage. Once you put it down, you can then adjust it. Don't adjust it as you're putting it down. Put it down, and once the weight is on the surface that you're putting onto, then you can adjust. Okay, brilliant. So that brings us to the end of that video. So hopefully that helps when you come to complete this unit.